Before we dive into this incredible true story about one of Hollywood's greatest comebacks, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. What you're about to hear happened at a Las Vegas casino in the 1960s, and it's a moment that defined what real courage under pressure looks like. This is a story about Dean Martin, one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived, and a dangerous confrontation that could have ended very badly. But his response was so quick, so clever, so perfect, that even the Mafia boss had to respect him. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss stories like this about the legends of entertainment. Now, let's begin. It was 1962 at the Copa Cabana nightclub in Las Vegas. Dean Martin was on stage, doing what he did best, making people laugh, singing, charming the audience. But that night, someone in the crowd didn't think he was funny. A Mafia boss stood up and confronted Dean in front of hundreds of people. The room went silent. Everyone knew what this meant. This could turn ugly very quickly. But what Dean said next, his response was so brilliant, so perfectly timed, that the Mafia boss himself started laughing. And the entire room erupted. This is the story of how one man's quick thinking and confidence turned a dangerous situation into a legendary moment. Why this works *. Creates immediate tension and danger. Appeals to nostalgia and classic Hollywood. Shows what happens when power is challenged. Mystery about what Dean said. Emotional payoff promised. Respects the intelligence of the audience. To understand this story, you need to understand Las Vegas in the early 1960s. And you need to understand who Dean Martin really was. Las Vegas in the 1960s wasn't like Las Vegas today. There were no mega casinos. There were no family-friendly theme parks. Las Vegas was owned by the Mafia. The major casinos, the Sands, the Copa Cabana, the Desert Inn, they were all either owned by or connected to Mafia families. The mob ran Las Vegas, and that meant they controlled everything. The gambling, the entertainment, the money, the violence, and most importantly, the power. Performers who came to Las Vegas understood this. They understood that they were performing for people who were very dangerous. People who could make you disappear if they didn't like you. People who had already killed people. People who thought nothing of violence. This was a time in American history when the Mafia still had tremendous power and influence. They ran casinos, nightclubs, and businesses across the country. They owned politicians. They owned judges. They owned police officers. And in Las Vegas, they owned the entertainment industry. Dean Martin was different from many entertainers of his time. He was confident. He was charming. He was funny. But he was also intelligent and perceptive. He understood the power structures he was operating in, and he was smart enough to navigate them carefully, but also confidently. Dean had grown up in Ohio. His real name was Dino Paul Crocetti. His father was an Italian immigrant barber. Dean had wanted to be an entertainer since he was young. He started singing in local clubs and restaurants. Eventually, he made his way to Chicago, then to New York, and finally to Hollywood. By 1960, Dean Martin was one of the most popular entertainers in America. He'd been in movies. He'd had hit records. He was funny. He was charming. And he had a particular quality that audiences loved. He seemed completely unafraid. He had a confidence that suggested nothing could rattle him. This confidence, more than anything else, would save his life on this particular night. In 1962, Dean was performing at the Copa Cabana in Las Vegas. The Copa was one of the most exclusive nightclubs in the city. It was where the Mafia boss Tony Spilatro and his associates went to see entertainment. Tony Spilatro wasn't just a Mafia boss. He was a killer. He was known for his brutal methods. He'd murdered people with his bare hands. He was feared throughout Las Vegas. And he had the kind of ego that came from having absolute power. Tony had come to the Copa that night with a group of associates. They were drinking. They were enjoying the entertainment. And then Dean made a joke that happened to be directed, however indirectly, at the Mafia's presence in Las Vegas. The exact joke has been lost to history. Different sources report different versions. But the general idea was that Dean had made a comment that suggested the Mafia's control of Las Vegas, or their violent nature, or their lack of sophistication. It was the kind of joke that would have made most audiences laugh. But Tony Spilatro wasn't most audiences. And he wasn't the kind of person who laughed off being disrespected. Tony stood up. He was a large man, muscular and imposing. Everyone in the room immediately recognized who he was. Everyone in the room knew what this meant. The band stopped playing. The audience stopped laughing. Everyone's attention shifted to what was happening at Tony's table. Tony pointed at Dean and called him out. In front of hundreds of people, he essentially said, "That wasn't funny. And you shouldn't be making jokes about people like us." The implication was clear. Dean had crossed a line. And there might be consequences. In this moment, Dean Martin had several options, and none of them were good. Option 1 was to back down. To apologize. To say he hadn't meant any disrespect. This was the safe option. Most entertainers would have chosen this. Most entertainers would have been terrified. But Dean understood something that most people don't. Backing down to someone like Tony Spilatro wasn't actually safe. It was dangerous. Because once you showed fear, once you showed that you could be intimidated, you became someone who could be controlled. And controlled people who work in entertainment venues owned by the Mafia often end up having accidents. Option 2 was to be defensive. To argue. To say that he had a right to make jokes. This would have been disastrous. Arguing with a Mafia boss in front of his associates was basically suicide. Option 3 was what Dean actually did. He didn't break character. He didn't show fear. And he didn't back down. Instead, he did something brilliant. He made it funny. Without missing a beat, without showing any sign of fear or nervousness, Dean looked directly at Tony and said something to the effect of, "I wasn't making fun of you, boss. I was making fun of guys like me. Guys trying to make a living in a world where guys like you own everything." But the way Dean said it, the timing, the delivery, the confidence, transformed it. He acknowledged the power dynamic. He showed respect. But he also showed that he wasn't afraid. And somehow in doing that, he disarmed the entire situation. The room held its breath. What would Tony do? For a moment, it seemed like it could go either way. Tony could decide that Dean's response was insolent. He could decide that Dean needed to be taught a lesson. He could decide that making Dean disappear would send a message to other entertainers about what happened when you disrespected the Mafia. But then something unexpected happened. Tony smiled. And not a fake smile. A real smile. A smile of someone who respected what had just happened. Because Tony understood power. And what Dean had just done was a masterclass in handling power. Dean had acknowledged that Tony was the more powerful person in the room. He'd shown respect. But he hadn't shown fear. And in the world of the Mafia, in a world built on power and respect, that combination, respect without fear, was something to be admired. Tony started laughing. And as soon as Tony laughed, the entire room laughed. What had been a moment of intense danger suddenly became a moment of shared humor. The band started playing again. The audience went back to their drinks. And Dean went back to his show. But something important had happened in those 30 seconds. Dean had faced down a dangerous man in front of hundreds of people. And he'd done it with intelligence, confidence, and humor. Word of what happened at the Copa Cabana spread throughout Las Vegas. Within days, every major performer in the city knew the story. And the story reinforced something that was already true. Dean Martin was someone you didn't mess with because he was too smart, too quick, and too confident to be intimidated. In the days after the incident, Tony Spilatro actually became protective of Dean. If anything, the incident had increased Dean's safety, not decreased it. Because now everyone in Las Vegas knew that the Mafia boss himself respected Dean Martin. The incident at the Copa Cabana became legendary in Las Vegas. It became a teaching story about how to handle power and intimidation with intelligence and humor. But more importantly, it revealed something about Dean Martin's character that would define his career. Dean wasn't someone who was brave in the traditional sense. He wasn't someone who stood up to power because he was looking for a fight. He wasn't someone who wanted to be a hero. But Dean understood something fundamental. The best way to deal with someone who has power is not to challenge that power directly, but to acknowledge it while refusing to be controlled by fear. By making the situation funny, by turning the confrontation into a moment of humor. Dean had taken a situation where the Mafia boss had all the power and made it a situation where they were both participating in something clever and entertaining. In that moment, they weren't adversaries. They were both part of the same world, the world of entertainment and showmanship. And in that world, wit and intelligence and confidence were valued more highly than physical power. The Copa Cabana incident had a significant impact on Dean's career. It made him more famous. It made him a legend. But more importantly, it demonstrated something that would carry through the rest of his career. Dean Martin was someone who could handle any situation with grace, intelligence, and humor. Over the next several years, Dean continued to perform in Las Vegas. And while there were occasionally difficult moments, they were never as serious as that night at the Copa Cabana. The Mafia bosses who ran Las Vegas had decided that Dean was an asset, not a liability. And they protected him accordingly. Dean's career continued to flourish. He had hit records. He was in major motion pictures. He became close friends with Frank Sinatra and other major entertainers. He was part of the Rat Pack, a group of performers who were known for their charm, their talent, and their ability to handle themselves in any situation. But the Copa Cabana incident remained the most famous confrontation of Dean's career. It was the moment that defined what courage under pressure really looked like. Years later, when asked about the incident, Dean would downplay it. He would say it was just something that happened. He would credit Tony Spilotro with being smart enough to understand humor and respect. But what Dean didn't say was that his quick thinking in that moment had probably saved his life, or at least saved him from serious harm. The incident also became a famous story in Hollywood. Other entertainers who'd found themselves in dangerous situations would talk about the Copa Cabana incident as an example of how to handle power. How to respect power without being controlled by fear. How to use intelligence and humor as a defense against violence. The Copa Cabana incident teaches us several important lessons, and they're all relevant today. The first lesson is about how power actually works. We often think of power as something that's purely physical. The strongest person wins. But real power is more complex than that. Real power comes from intelligence, confidence, and the ability to understand what other people value. Tony Spilotro had physical power. He had the power to hurt people. But what Dean understood was that Tony also valued something else: wit, intelligence, and entertainment value. By appealing to those values, Dean was able to navigate the dangerous situation he found himself in. The second lesson is about confidence and how it protects us. Dean was confident not because he was naive or because he didn't understand the danger. He was confident because he understood himself. He understood his own intelligence. He understood his own ability to think quickly and respond cleverly. That confidence was protective because it made him unpredictable. Someone who's terrified is predictable. They're either going to fight or flee. But someone who's calm and confident might do something unexpected. And people who are powerful often respect people who can't be easily controlled through fear. The third lesson is about humor as a tool for diffusing tension. Humor has a particular power. When you make someone laugh, you're doing something magical. You're creating a moment of shared humanity. You're saying, we're both human. We both understand what's funny. We both appreciate cleverness. In that moment at the Copa Cabana, Dean used humor to transform a moment of potential violence into a moment of shared entertainment. And that transformation came from understanding what the other person valued. The fourth lesson is about respecting power without being controlled by it. This is crucial. Dean respected Tony Spilotro. He acknowledged that Tony was more powerful than he was. But he didn't let that fear control his response. This is something that's true in many situations. In workplaces, in relationships, in social situations, in politics, we often encounter people who have more power than we do. The question is, how do we navigate that? Dean's approach was to acknowledge the power imbalance while refusing to be diminished by it. He showed respect. But he also showed that he was a thinking, intelligent person who could contribute to the conversation. The fifth lesson is about the importance of knowing your environment. Dean wasn't just a talented entertainer. He was also very aware of the Las Vegas power structure. He understood who he was dealing with. He understood what was at stake. That awareness informed his response. He didn't just blindly make jokes and hope for the best. He understood the specific dynamic he was in, and he calibrated his response accordingly. This is true in any high-stakes situation. Understanding your environment, understanding the people you're dealing with, understanding what they value and what they're willing to do, that knowledge is powerful. The legacy and final message. Dean Martin lived to be 78 years old. He died in 1995, long after the Mafia's power in Las Vegas had declined significantly. But his legend remained intact. What struck people about Dean Martin wasn't just that he was talented. Lots of people were talented. What struck people was that Dean seemed to navigate difficult situations with grace and intelligence. He never seemed rattled. He never seemed afraid. The Copa Cabana incident became emblematic of this quality. It became a moment that defined not just Dean's career, but how people thought about dealing with power and danger. In 2007, the incident was featured in the HBO series The Sopranos, a series about mafia power in modern times. The showrunners used the Copa Cabana story as a reference point for how things used to work in Las Vegas. How respect and intelligence and entertainment value could earn you protection, even from dangerous people. Today, Dean Martin is remembered not just as an entertainer, but as someone who had wisdom, someone who understood people, someone who knew how to navigate complex social situations with grace and intelligence. The Copa Cabana incident remains one of the most famous stories from Las Vegas's golden age. And it remains relevant today, not as a story about the Mafia, but as a story about human behavior, about how to handle conflict, about how to respond to power with intelligence rather than fear. If this story inspired you, if it made you think about courage and intelligence and how to handle difficult situations, then I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on your notifications. Because every week, we bring you stories like this one. Stories from history's most fascinating moments. Stories about people who handled pressure with grace and intelligence. Stories that remind us what real courage looks like. ***. Share this video, because people need to understand that strength isn't always about being physically dominant. Strength is about intelligence. Strength is about confidence. Strength is about understanding people and knowing how to handle complex situations. Share this with someone who's facing a difficult situation. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that cleverness and respect can be more powerful than aggression. ***. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between backing down and standing your ground? Did you handle it with intelligence like Dean Martin did? Or have you learned a lesson from a situation where you didn't handle it well? Have you ever used humor to diffuse a tense situation? Your stories matter. Your perspective matters. Because every comment helps us understand the many ways that real courage shows up in our lives. ***. Thank you for watching. Thank you for taking time to understand what Dean Martin really understood about human nature and power. We'll see you in the next video. Subscribe now. Don't miss the next story from history's golden age of entertainment and the lessons it can teach us today. ***. Remember, real power isn't about being the strongest or the most dangerous. Real power is about intelligence, confidence, and understanding what people truly value. That's what made Dean Martin a legend, not just as an entertainer, but as a human being who understood how to navigate the world. ***.